My father passed away at the age of 66. I'm in my 50s right now, and he started to deteriorate in his 50s. And at the time, did not know what the diagnosis was. It took us several years to find this diagnosis. We had gone to every major medical center and nobody knew what was going on with him. But we were seeing and he was experiencing a deterioration that was unexplained. And finally, at one of the major medical centers we were at, that was also a teaching hospital, they decided to study him and were able to diagnose him with a very rare neurological degenerative disease called Progressive Supranuclear Palsy. It also has a dual diagnosis with corticobasal degeneration, or CBD. So it can be referred to as PSP or CBD. And by the time we got the diagnosis, there had been quite incredible decline. And the physician at the time, of course, once we got the diagnosis, just sent us home. There's no treatment and there's no cure, and there's a strong, strong progression. And so, because it attacks the frontal lobe of the brain, that is the part of your brain that controls your muscles and your muscle control. And so he lost muscle control. And usually the first symptom is board falls, just these unexpected, non-ability to brace yourself, just you fall stiff as a board. And so he was always a fall risk. But I think what really hit us the most was that he lost muscle control of his tongue. And that took away immediately his ability to speak other than one syllable. And it wasn't a syllable that meant anything. So it was just one sound over and over and over again. It was the only noise he could make. So we lost verbal communication with him years before he passed. And then shortly after that, we started to notice, even though diligently I would work with him, he was in a loving home. We were caring for him at home. We were making sure he had good food. I was doing massage therapy and physical therapy in our pool, trying to keep his muscles moving and working. It's the whole reason why there's a pool in our home, was to work, to try to fight something that was progressing faster than any of our diligent work could keep up with. He lost all muscle control of his facial muscles. So no facial expressions. So we lost verbal communication and we lost facial expression. And it's a scary and very traumatic thing to see someone who has no muscles working in their face. You don't realize how many muscles that it's taking for you to even just hold your skin up, so to say. And that also meant that he couldn't open his eyes because he had no muscles to open his eyelids. And every now and then we would get Botox injections to try to open his eyes, and that would fade away. He had a very hard time feeding himself because he couldn't see, and it was also hard for him to have those motor skills of being able to use a fork. And even sometimes we would try to get him to be able to write, to communicate with us, and that was a struggle because, again, muscle control. And so there was quite a long, very cruel deterioration in his late 50s, early 60s. And then when it was time for him to pass and we felt his body shutting down, it was a very long dying process. It was a very medicated dying process. It was a very violent dying process. Of course, by this time there was no more communication, but I could feel his body in a violent way fighting to live. And we just had to keep medicating him with morphine. And it was a 2-week dying process for him. And then he passed in such a violent way. And such a medicated way that I was the person staying the night with him, administering the morphine around the clock. I thought I killed him from a morphine overdose because I was delirious from I would wake up every so often to make sure he had enough morphine to not be in so much pain. And the morning when I woke up and he had passed, when I reflected on how much I woke up to give him morphine, and I was fairly delirious from lack of sleep, I was certain I had given him, too much. And so then there's, that aspect of it. And then years later, I was introduced due to a health crisis with my son to Nutrigenomics. And I stepped into this business because of the wonderful things we see, because of the wonderful things that I experienced with several of my sons and myself, and then the people I've been able to help. And I see people all the time defy the odds. And I see at Gull Arbor, at Shanell's business, people defy the odds left and right. And we see amazing things. We see things that when people think there's no hope, we see hope, and we see power. And we see people, that Shanell started to see her average stay become in years and not months, and people living strong. And people, part of what got my attention with this was when Shanell had shared with me that people were going off meds, and they were going off hospice, and they were gaining cognitive skills if they had had dementia. It was radical. But there was always in the back of my mind, maybe, what could have happened, for my dad. Could this have helped my dad? PSP seemed so untouchable. And then one day, I got a call from my friend Shanell, we just love to share nutrigenomic stories. We're in this business together now. And she, not knowing what my dad passed from, because he died before Shanell and I were friends, she said, and we're gonna use a different name for the resident that she had, and we're gonna call this resident Donna, which is not her real name. She said, I have a resident with supranuclear palsy. And I just thought, what? And she said, and you wouldn't believe how wonderful she's responding to activation. And again, I'm like, what do you mean? And she had told me that she was reversing every symptom. And I had to go through the laundry list with Shanell. Like, what do you mean? Can she open her eyes? Can she speak? And I had all these questions. And so I want to hand it over to Shanell to kind of share Donna's story. Now, mind you, Donna was in her 90s. My father passed in his 60s. And we know that there should be some age-related impact. So often if certain things hit, it should hit older people harder, and they should have a harder time working through certain progressions of disease, given just their age and the vulnerabilities of aging. So in comparison, in my mind, we have a man who started his progression in his 50s compared to Donna, who started her progression in her 90s. So would you share with us a little bit about what did you experience with Donna?
So when Donna first came to us, her life expectancy wasn't long at that point. She was already doing those board falls. And she had loved to read, but she had stopped reading. We were getting her books on CD, things like that from the library so she could continue. She had a dementia component also, where I
forgot to mention that. There is a dementia component, but because my dad couldn't speak and communicate, we did notice it in some out of character behavior, but it wasn't as evident as it would be with someone who could speak.
Yeah, she was combative when she first came to us, and each morning she woke up, she didn't know where she was at. We had to tell her again. And so with this diagnosis, I was prepared that why it's called Progressive Supranuclear Palsy is because it progresses. And so we brought in a team. I educated my staff on what we're going to be doing and the care level that it's going to be taking. And so we started all of this stuff, and she just kind of plateaued. She didn't get worse, which was kind of crazy because we were expecting it to get worse. And she just kind of stayed the same for several months. And we were just kind of watching her. And after, I would say probably 4 to 5 months, we started seeing her improving, even stronger, better gaits in her walking. She was awake more. She was talking more. She was actually wanting to read a book, picking up books to read. And she was just doing so well. It was subtle, and you didn't notice it because just over time, she just kept getting just a little bit more acclimated, kind of is what we thought here. But she just was like awakening. She just kind of came out of this bad dream almost and started functioning well again. And over some time, she went back to her neurologist the first year, and he said she wanted to walk. She really wanted to walk by herself. After a year, she was like, I don't want assistance. I feel really good. And we're like, no, this diagnosis, you can't have, you need a standby assist. We don't want to risk a fall and all this stuff. And that's exactly what the neurologist told her. Like, you have this, there's no such thing as remission, there's no such thing as a cure. So, we really strongly suggest that you stay, having somebody beside you. So she came home feeling really sad about that, a little depressed because she was feeling so good. And she continued on a whole other year, just making great improvements, to the point at some points she was just plain showing off. She would lift up her walker and walk. and she was reading, devouring books. She was feeding herself at the table. We didn't see anything like that. She was just doing so well. She started going out to get her hair done with her daughter. She was shopping. She was living a normal life. And after the second year, she went back again and said the same thing, like, I feel great, I'm doing all of this stuff. And the neurologist kind of just said, there's no such thing as remission, there's no such thing as a cure for this, but you don't really have the markers anymore. Like, I don't know how to explain this, but if you want to take the risk, you can go home and I will give you permission to walk on your own. And she did. She was so excited about that. She came home, she took herself to the bathroom, took herself to bed. She was just doing really well and excited about that. And she actually lived 5 years, which was amazing, especially being diabetic. She needed less insulin, but she was doing really well. And even the morning she passed was just, she was just extra tired. She didn't feel like eating breakfast. Her vitals were still good. Everything was stable. And she just went back to sleep and just passed. It was beautiful.
So I think, too, what really stands out to me, well, there's so many things that stand out, but I still am so taken back that on the day she died, she had a conversation, she walked, and she just took a nap. It was so gentle. It wasn't medicated. There wasn't morphine. It was just her body was done.
Yep.
And she lived until she didn't.
Yep.
My dad didn't live until he didn't. He hadn't lived in a really long time.
Yeah.
And that, what a gift. What a gift for you to, I know a lot of your integration of nutrigenomics doesn't come without a fight.
Right.
And I'm just so grateful.
Yes, absolutely. And not only did she live longer, but her who cares if you live longer if your quality isn't good?
Oh, right.
But
I think my dad would have rather gone sooner.
Yeah.
The condition of his life.
Quality.
Yeah. He hadn't had quality in so long that he didn't want to be alive. And that was one of the cruel things, too.
Yep.
But for her to be able to read and sing and talk and visit and
she
walk.
Had a great personality, and it was just fun.
And how old was she?
She had
after
a phone
she had
right
gone
next to her, and took calls all day long from her kids.
Wow. And she lived 5 years without symptoms. And then at what age did she pass?
97.
97.
Yep. Yep.
What a pumpkin. It's just incredible what you do. Thank you for fighting for that.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
appreciate
she
it.
Had longer life and quality.